I am leaving a glittering world where I had a glittering position. But with all of you, I am descending into a greater world, the world of the poor and the suffering. This quote opens Grand Duchess Elizabeth's page on the Westminster Abbey website, describing her as one of the modern martyrs memorialized in stone at the west entrance to the Abbey. If you were making a BBC series on the life of Grand Duchess Elizabeth, the beginning would indeed be captivating and glittering. Elizabeth was one of the granddaughters of Queen Victoria, and she had quite an array of suitors and admirers. You could spend all of season 1 just detailing the glittering balls and parties and drama of royal courtship. Elizabeth seems to have turned down quite a few proposals before Grand Duke Sergei of Russia was lucky enough to capture her attention. And when he proposed for the second time, she said yes. Season 2 of our imagined show, for of course by this time it would be so beloved that it would be renewed for more episodes. Season 2 would show Elizabeth's arrival in Russia, her wedding at the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, and perhaps even her conversion from the Lutheran to Russian Orthodox Church. It was said that everyone fell in love with her in Russia, and so our series would continue to show her glittering world. But then, cliffhanger, Grand Duke Sergei was assassinated. Perhaps then the series would take a much darker tone for its third and final season, and we would see what led to that assassination. Against all the glitter of the Tsarist state, we would explore the repression of the commoners and the increasing talk of revolution. Deep in mourning for her husband, Elizabeth completely reoriented her life. She sold her extraordinary collection of jewels, her fine possessions, and used the proceeds to open the convent of Saints Mary and Martha. As its abbess, Elizabeth and her sisters devoted themselves to a kind of diaconal ministry, caring for all those who were suffering and poor in the slums of Moscow. But when the Bolsheviks seized power and began persecuting the church, Elizabeth and many others were arrested, sent away to prison camps. In 1918, Elizabeth, several of her sisters, and members of the royal family were all executed in a mine shaft. Not the most uplifting ending for our miniseries, but perhaps we will end instead with Elizabeth's canonization by the Russian Orthodox Church. I am leaving a glittering world where I had a glittering position, but with all of you, I am descending into a greater world, the world of the poor and the suffering. What inspired Elizabeth to make such a radical shift in her life? To give up her glittering world with its sparkling jewels, its luxurious surroundings, and instead go out into what she called the greater world. The world where the vast majority of humanity lived. How did she find the wisdom to make such a change? Where can such wisdom be found? Well, wisdom tells us herself. in our first reading from the book of Proverbs. There we find woman wisdom. And she isn't just speaking to us. She's crying out. On top of high places, in the middle of the crossroads, beside the gates of the towns and cities. Wisdom isn't hidden away in a dusty, locked room. She isn't enshrined in a temple. She isn't luxuriating in a palace. She is out among the people. She is in the greater world. Proverbs tells us that woman wisdom was present of the creation of everything we know. The state of being wise, of understanding what is right, and just as importantly, acting on that understanding. It is an integral part of God's creation of us. We were created to seek and embrace wisdom, to learn what it means to be wise, to live more abundantly in wisdom's insight. So how do we do that? Here, wisdom offers us an invitation to eat of her bread and drink of her wine, to turn away from foolishness and live. We find the very wisdom of God all around us in food and drink and the basic necessities of life. And we might notice where we do not find wisdom. Not only is she not hidden away, but instead is out in the greater world, wisdom is not found in glittering jewels and luxurious possessions of high society. In fact, she says the fruit she has to offer is better than gold, better than silver. Because wisdom is found in the everyday, the bread and wine and other essentials that sustain us and give us abundant life. And further, she is always offering us her hospitality through these basics of life. And so she invites us to gain in God's wisdom when we generously offer these essentials to others who need them. Lydia, in our reading from Acts of the Apostles, does just that. She didn't live quite as glittering a life as Elizabeth did, but we do learn that she is a seller of purple, or in other words, a merchant of cloth that only the wealthy could afford. And so Lydia was clearly a woman with some power, some high social status. The Apostle Paul encounters her on the fringes of the city, though, not where the wealthy usually hang out. And she was with a group dedicating themselves to prayer. Perhaps that's when wisdom offered Lydia what she needed most for an abundant life: the nourishment of Paul's preaching of the good news of Christ. Being fed in that way encouraged Lydia to open her home to Paul and his companions, offering these strangers the generous hospitality of bread and wine and the other basics of life. Grand Duchess Elizabeth also found wisdom as she used the proceeds from the stuff of her glittering life to fund a ministry devoted to offering hospitality to the people in Moscow who needed it so desperately. The nourishment that woman wisdom offered her was exactly what she needed most: a new purpose, turning around and offering the essentials of life concretely and generously to so many people in need. I am leaving a glittering world where I had a glittering position. But with all of you, I am descending into a greater world, the world of the poor and the suffering. Not all of us have been living a glittering life, though compared to most of the greater world, many of us are very comfortable. And perhaps the last few years of pandemic, of societal unrest, and now the horror of war being grievously waged by Elizabeth's beloved Russia, all of that might be serving to push us, as the assassination of her husband pushed Elizabeth, pushing us to seek a change, to reorient our lives. How will wisdom guide us now toward continuing to serve primarily our own ends, or offering to others hospitality, the hospitality wisdom is always offering us? Jesus himself made the choice clear. As the very embodiment of God's wisdom, he feeds us with his very being, enlightening us through the transformation of the basic elements of bread and wine. And as he offers hospitality and nourishment and healing to all in the greater world, he invites us to follow him and to do the same. He invites us to forsake all foolishness, to live in the greater world, to offer hospitality to those in need. As you might know, it says in the program, I believe, I serve at Church of the Holy Apostles in Chelsea, which offers one of the largest emergency food programs in the country. St. Thomas has been a generous supporter of our ministry, and through your generosity and the generosity of so many others, we were able to respond to the shock of the pandemic and the attendant economic crisis to radically increase our capacity to serve our guests, moving from providing 344,000 meals for the year of 2019 to providing 1.2 million meals in 2020 and 2.1 million meals this last year, 2021. And it's not just the basic essentials of food that the soup kitchen offers, but many other necessities, such as referrals to social service agencies, help in getting a new ID, haircuts, winter coats, and perhaps one of the biggest essentials, being treated as an honored guest. One of our former guests, Chris, was just telling me the other day that the soup kitchen helped him to find stability in his life. And he is now proud to be a volunteer himself, to offer the hospitality he found to others now. This is an essential aspect of wisdom. The wisdom that Elizabeth found in leaving her glittering life and entering the greater world and offering hospitality to those she found there. The wisdom that Lydia found in the preaching of the good news that inspired her to offer hospitality to Paul and his friends. The wisdom that Chris found as well, even though he was far from the glittering world of Elizabeth and even the well-off world of Lydia. He too is finding wisdom in offering hospitality to others. How are you being called by wisdom? How are you being called by Christ? How are you being called to offer hospitality yourself? How might you forsake foolishness, offering essentials to those in need instead? Let us each eat of wisdom's bread, drink of her wine, and offer nourishment to others as well, living in the greater world and walking in the way of understanding. Amen.